Hi, welcome to the latest installment in Schumacher's webinar series, Meet the Makers. I'm Megan Truelove. I'm Schumacher's Director of Business Development for Creative Partnerships. And today I'm super excited to be here with two of the women driving the beloved independent brand, Caroline Z. Hurley. So we have founder herself, Caroline Hurley, as well as COO Stephanie Chaplin. And we're here to just learn about how CZH got started, what they're up to, what's coming next, and just have a fun conversation. And we'll also do a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, you can just pop them into the chat, and then we'll make sure we save some time at the end to run through the questions. Okay, so let's get started. So Caroline, will you start by just giving us some context for your background as a painter and your just your journey as an artist and how that evolved into the brand?
Yes, for sure. So I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline, and I, have always had an art practice. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design for painting, and having a studio outside of whatever I did was always something that was a part of my life. Even when I was, very, very young, just in the city, I would always find a way to have like $100 that I would spare up just for a little corner of a room that I rented for painting. So that has always been a part of something that I do. So I started the business in that studio, not knowing that I was starting a business. And that was about 10 years ago, more or less. So it started, at the time I was teaching preschool, and I always had sort of odd jobs to pay for my life as a painter and artist. And so at the time I found a job that really worked for me, which was teaching preschool, because I could go into work from 9 to 3. And then at 3, I had all this time in the afternoon to really work and be creative. And that is where a lot of things began to blossom for me. And that's where my business began. It was during that time. So I went to Bali, took a really inspiring trip, and got inspired by the textiles there, and created a little corner of my studio just for block printing. And it was really from that corner that I started to make pillows and throws and just things that I wanted. So I wanted a throw for the beach. So I made a throw and took it to the beach, and then friends wanted some. And then, I made more pillows, and stores wanted them. So it did grow organically. I did not have a business plan. I did not intend to grow a business at that point in time. I was just having fun in the studio. And I started to realize that there was some more interest than I originally thought in the throws and the pillows. And so I took them to a trade show, and the trade show was very successful for me because I got orders that I realized I couldn't make them all like I was doing in my studio, hand block printing each piece and sewing each piece and sewing in the tag and all that stuff was just not sustainable. So I did some research and looked around and tried to find artisans or even just people who would come to my studio to help me with this work. And through my research, that's another whole story that I'm happy to talk about later. But through my research, I found a group of artisans living in New Bedford, Massachusetts, who were willing to help, who were weavers, who were really skilled artisans. So I was able to train them over one weekend. I drove up, trained them, and they've been doing the production for all of our block printed products and fabrics ever since. And so that's been about 7 years now. So we have a really great working relationship with them. They're sort of the center of CZH. They are like what fuels us. They are really important people. And so there's the history of New Bedford is also something I think that is exciting to talk about. New Bedford has a rich textile history. There are so many.
It's really it was where the American textile industry really started, in the 18th century, right?
Yeah. And I think that that was something there's just these buildings that are like, you can like feel the craftsmanship that was there. You
Yeah,
can feel, like the mills are still like, the machinery is still sort of there.
so
And
cool.
you can feel that, and it's really cool that it has that history, and that really excited me. And I really, even at that point when I didn't even know exactly what I was building, I had
And
a vision to create some sort of a modern version of a factory, like
yeah.
to revive one of these buildings and to have like a textile factory of some kind.
And
And
so
I
did you specifically, like when you started to really dig in and want to establish a printing facility, did you, like, was New Bedford at the top of your list, or how did you kind of like make your way to New Bedford? Because it's just such a cool
I
synchronicity that
know,
it does have this like really like intense textile history,
I
and
know.
that you have been able to kind of like revive a piece of that in this modern way that's still so connected to the handmade. It's really
Yeah, it is. I mean, that is an interesting story in and of itself. And I'll just quickly run into it, which is I had been to India to try to find block printers. And well, I got really, first things first, I got really sick there. So I was like, I can't go back ever. Like,
right.
not that that should
It's not sustainable to
not
have
that
those.
that
Yeah,
should be the reason, but it did sort of taint my experience. But more than that, the bigger picture was that I
yeah,
couldn't find a factory that could produce what I wanted to produce. Like I liked that the ink sat on top of the fabric. I liked that it felt like my paintings. And the pigment dyes that they were using in India didn't have the same feeling. And I tried to replicate that with some of their dyes and some of their pigments, and it didn't quite, the samples that I got back from India, I still have them somewhere, but they aren't the same. It didn't capture what I was
hmm,
looking for. So I was interested in trying to find people that could come to my studio. So, hiring interns, hiring whatever. And then what I found is they're all like, I went to community centers in Queens, and like I was doing deep research. And at the
hmm,
time I hired an intern, um, who I paid like something crazy, like $100 a week or something, to
hmm.
help me with this project. And he led me to a group of artisans in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He also is now my husband, who I have
Amazing.
a
So he
baby.
earned his keep in more ways than one.
Right,
Good.
right.
Okay, good.
So I just always love to like remind him of that, like he kind of like, when he tells the story of how we met, he kind of like breezes through the fact that like he was once my intern. Um,
Right.
but anyway, um, I feel like that. So he really brought what is now a pretty essential part of the business, is these workers, to my awareness. So he went to Brown
Mhm.
and had worked with these artisans for a weaving project that he was working on,
Okay.
through a class he was taking at RISD. And he had stayed in touch with them. He wrote he did a documentary about them. He like really stayed
Cool.
in touch with them after
Yeah.
school. And so he introduced me to them. And it was like one of those immediate, like, this is it. Like, I didn't even need to look any further. It was like, they got this.
Amazing.
So we went there and trained them. And then it was sort of like magic ever since, because, it was pretty a perfect fit.
So cool.
They
So
also are
So
so like good. They're so good with their hands. They really like, even though they'd never block printed before, they understood the concept. And we're so in the day to day of it that we forget how unusual and how amazing it is to print hundreds and thousands of yards of fabric by hand. As far as we know, there is no one else in America who's doing that, who's cutting each shape by hand, who's painting by hand and then pressing into the fabric individually, hundreds and thousands of yards. And so the block printing that they do in India is amazing, and like the birthplace of block printing. But in terms of what we create, it's very different to traditional block printing that you might be familiar with. Like Cara was saying, with the resist and the dyeing and all of that kind of stuff, it's far more negative space. It's like, we're creating an entirely new design. So it almost was fitting that actually we were working with people that had never block printed before and didn't have any history of that or come from any kind of like have any preconceived notions of what that should look like.
Right. People who are like really incredibly skilled as artisans and making things and like using their hands and kind of like being super creative, but hadn't actually block printed. That's such an interesting point. So will you guys walk us through like what the actual process is? Like these two images here start to hint at it, but tell us what's different about what you guys do at New Bedford from a technical perspective.
Steph, you got this, right?
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
So this is actually, you can see these photos are Caro actually printing, doing like a printing session in the studio herself. So she cuts from linoleum the shape that she's looking for, and we kind of have an alphabet of shapes that we use. And it's very simple. It's kind of circles, semicircles, rectangles, squares, triangles. It's very simple, and it's just, when Carrie describes it, she talks about using them in different ways and liking the constraint of just having a simple set of shapes within which to work. So the first step is cutting the linoleum and then painting the paint. So we use non-toxic paints, painting the paint onto the stamp and then pressing that into the fabric, which in our case is linen. We always print on linen because it is much more environmentally friendly. It uses a lot less water than cotton. It lasts a long time. It ages very well. So that's
it.
And
Also,
it's natural.
I learned recently is without dyes is actually you can put it in your compost, like incredibly sustainable. So something else that's
good
cool.
to add.
And you guys use the most beautiful linen.
Yes. So, and if you've ever come to one of our block printing workshops, or if we're ever able post COVID to do those again, it was, that we used to do those in our studio.
It'll happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah, it will happen. It's incredibly hard to do. Like, our artisans make it look so easy, but it's really, really hard to paint the right amount, to get the pressure just right so it doesn't splurge all over the place and that it, there's an even coating. So then you press it into the fabric, and they typically do, they, as you can see from this photo, they work on each side. We have templates made from PVC that they lay over, so they know exactly where to place the print so that it fits with the spec sheets that we have. And then they just go and keep going. But considering that, in a block printing workshop that's 3 hours long, we might print one artwork or one tea towel, and they're doing thousands of yards at a time. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
and so these two pictures are of the print shop in New Bedford.
Yes.
And I mean, I just love that it really is literally printers kind of like having the handheld blocks and with a paintbrush out of a pot of paint, painting onto the block, and then really pressing it into the linen. And I think it's so brilliant also the technique that you guys developed of having the PVC laid out with kind of cutouts where the blocks should be pressed down. It's just such a smart way to kind of map out the design while still allowing for like this incredible, artistry and feel of the hand, and kind of like just that, like you can really, with the CZH fabrics, you can really tell that they're handmade. It's just like, it's such a beautiful, immediately obvious inherent part of those patterns that I think is so special.
I think we really wanted to, we didn't want to lose that when we created at scale. So, what Caroline creates in her, with her own hand in her studio, which is like maybe one rectangle's like slightly like not in, like totally parallel or whatever. We wanted the possibility to create that also with our artisans, and for them to be able to like work within a framework without being too didactic about it. And also you design that way, Caroline, don't you? You design so that not everything's perfect and not everything's lined up, and sometimes there are gaps where you might not expect them, or the repeats not like exact.
Right.
So that's also intentional in the design.
And Caroline, what's that process like for you to design, to go from painting to designing pattern? You know, like how do you start to work out a pattern as a painter?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously it's coming from me, it's the same thing, but it is a very different side of my brain
Hmm.
that I'm working with when I'm designing versus painting. Uh, like Steph said, like I really like having a constraint, like a small alphabet, such as rectangles, triangles, circles,
Hmm.
and oftentimes I'm inspired by place, and place sparks a feeling, and I sort of um, let that feeling run through me in terms of color choice, in terms of placement, which you'll see as we get further into the presentation. Our collaboration with you is very much about place to me.
Hmm.
So that's for a lot of the work, it's about place where I get inspired, and then I will, I don't want to say channel, but it does feel sort of like that. It's sort of letting it come through me.
And when
Um,
you're working out a pattern, do you ever start to work it out with a paintbrush, or do you go to your set of blocks and work it out with the
Yeah, I mean,
blocks?
no, I never do. I hardly, I mean, I'll sketch with paint, and I'll sketch with, a piece of paper and a pencil.
Hmm.
But it, for the block printed stuff, it's sort of like I have my language there already. I have the shape, I have like a little bucket of shapes, and that's
Hmm.
where I generally start to create the work. It's generally not about a drawing and translating the drawing. It really does
Hmm.
come directly from that bucket of shapes, and using those as my language and as my um, place of creativity. And that being said, I do feel like, it's all coming from the same place. So like the language for the block printed stuff, there is a similar strain to what I'm making in my painting studio currently. There is a similar sense of like simplicity and sense of directness, if that makes sense. So they they are very different, but just coming from the same person. It's hard to describe actually, but I hope that did some justice to your question.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's, I think, always what's so incredible about creative vision, is that so often, even when, an artist is working in a range of media, you can tell that it's coming from the same
Mm,
place. It's coming from that same
mm.
artistic vision and kind of like creative process, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's like the same filter or something, the same vision. But yeah, it is
Yeah.
interesting.
And how did you develop the your vocabulary of shapes?
So I don't know if did I say this or not, but when I was teaching preschool, I don't think I mentioned this, but when I was teaching preschool, a lot of what I did with these kids was about circles, triangles, rectangles, and just simple shapes, and through that process, that migrated to my studio subconsciously, and maybe consciously too, where I would take sort of the same activities that I was using with my kids into my studio. And um, that is where sort of the beginning of this vocabulary came from. And um, so it's cool to see like your history really does, like, you build off of what you decide to do, and then you keep growing. And so that is where those came from. And I really like that it came from this like childlike environment. It came from this
Hmm.
sense of like earnest drawing, and earnest sort of like a sense of like wonder about like a simple rectangle, or
Hmm.
um and that's sort of where I began with it too, is like how many different varieties of patterns can I make with this one rectangle. How can I make this feel fresh with just this small set of shapes. And I feel like that is kind of a childlike way of looking at things. Even with my little baby that I have now, like everything is so new to her and so exciting. And that is how I try to approach that alphabet of shapes that we work with.
So cool. I love also that you're block printing emerged from this time that you spent working at, a preschool center as this place of play,
Yeah,
and that this kind of like whole new artistic practice emerged out of just this,
totally.
the notion of play, and just playing
Yeah.
around and seeing what happens. And
Yeah, and I
um,
also think that like for me at least, like it was the first job that I had that did sort of feel like play. I had had various other design jobs, and I was horrible at at any other job, and it was the first job where I was like able to sort of be present and work very hard and do a good job because it did feel like play. And I think that's also why our business carries that same sort of sensibility, because I'm not very good at work, like working, like I
well, and that also like play is so important,
yeah,
that like I think so often like, play has this association of being kind of frivolous or kind of like, like what you do when you're not doing something serious. But
yeah,
like I think that play is fundamental,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like it's the space from which so much like richness and really kind of, significance emerges.
totally. Yeah, I agree. I fully agree.
I also
Yeah.
think that's what people respond to in the fabrics. I think they really respond to that sense of play and the simplicity and the colors. And when we've done the workshops, people really love doing things with their hands. They really like returning to creativity and childlike pursuits and being allowed to just play around with ideas, not having to get it right, not having to for things to be perfect or whatever, but just be allowed to create without any kind of specific boundaries, which in normal day-to-day life is not something that we often have the opportunity to do as adults.
Yeah,
Totally.
true.
No, it's so great. We have a little, so there's a really beautiful video that Schumacher did with CZH that really beautifully captures Caroline's approach and the CZH brand. And you can find it on Schumacher's YouTube channel. But there's a clip within it that shows the New Bedford printing facility. And so we thought we could just run that quickly so that people can actually see the space in action. So Annie, will you hit play on that?
I knew I wanted the product to feel exactly what I was making in my painting studio. So it makes total sense that I would create my own production. I wanted the ink to sit on top of the linen. So I searched high and low and found a group of artisans living in New Bedford, Massachusetts. They're weavers by trade, but they were willing and eager to learn. Our way of block printing is different than normal block printing. We create blocks, so they're simple shapes made from linoleum, and we paint with a paintbrush on those shapes, and then we press individually into the linen. Then we heat set it, then it's finished.
Amazing, amazing. And how many patterns are you guys printing there at this point? I mean, I know for Schumacher in general, we carry, 4 CZH hand blocks. And then we've got 2 patterns that you designed for Schumacher that get printed there. And there are another couple that are going to launch this summer as part of a Schumacher collection. So that's, at least 8 patterns of running yardage, ordered by the hundreds of yards at a time, or at least the, big increments. So how much are you actually producing there? And does it feel, does it feel like a good capacity?
Yeah, it feels great. I mean, we must be doing at this point over 40 SKUs. So like, in terms of different colorways across all of the designs. So we have the collaborated designs that we did with you that launched in 2018. And then we've got a lot of our original designs, which some of which is yardage and some of which we make into products, throws and pillows. And so we've also been developing new block printed fabrics and different colorways of those. And one thing that has been great about working with Schumacher has been the ability to create more sustainability and more continuity in terms of getting those larger orders. It means that we can train more block printers, means that we can invest in the space, you know, buy new tables, train new people, and that has been really helpful in terms of helping us grow and plan. And so one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is developing depth within the collection in terms of colors. So going, you know, instead of going across lots of designs and going kind of shallow or a couple of colors in each, like really expanding and seeing what we can do if we create depth in each design and how the different designs can talk to each other and what that looks like. So that's been a really exciting process. And we've been working with, we have an amazing creative director and production designer, Carolina, who has also really helped to kind of bring our work to the next level. I mean, since I started in 2016.
I was just going to ask. And
yeah.
so was the New Bedford facility up and running when you joined?
Oh yeah. That was all.
But I should just note, like, it was running, but not so when Stephanie came to the business was when the business actually could grow and started to grow. And it was really because of Stephanie's vision that we were able to build out New Bedford in a better way, in a more sustainable way, and in a way that had order. So I'm not great with organization or order, which is why I need really organized people around me at all times.
It takes a village for everyone.
And so one of those really important people to the business is Steph. And so when she first came to the business, we sort of thought that it would be, you know, a couple days a week here and there, and like not a long-term thing. But the more I started to work with Steph, the more I realized what a vital component she could be to the growth of CZH. So I won her over to stay in the US. She was moving back to the UK at that point, and I convinced her to stay. So.
Good job.
And how did you guys meet? Like, how did your paths cross?
Through a mutual friend, you know, who introduced us. And
I was interested in working in his business, and I had a couple of meetings with him, and he, you know, things weren't progressing for whatever reason, and I just thought, like, I can't just wait around, like I need to get moving. And he said, you know, I don't know if I'm not in the right space to hire for this position, but I know somebody, I have a friend who's actually looking to hire. And so we met and we immediately hit it off. And there were a few tests to get through. Obviously I had to meet Alex, Caroline's husband. Right. So, you know, that was a big one. If he approved me, then, you know, but yeah, my plan was to move back to the UK and pursue a master's in sustainability. And I was just thinking to work for Caroline for a couple of days a week, right at the tail end of my work. But it was obviously meant to be, because every time I made a request about what I needed or what I thought was feasible, and I thought, well, she'll never be able to do it. You know, this will never be able to happen, or she'll never agree to this or that or the other. And every time she was like, yep, I'll do it.
That's true. So I was like, sort of like the you know, like I think you can tell when you have a business, like when someone comes along and there's a spark there, you do whatever you can to keep that going. And that's what I felt with Steph. So
we turned that whole ship around. We changed all our plans. My husband was supposed to be transferring with his company to London. We just like put the brakes on and we were like, okay, we're going to do this. The time that I called my mum to tell her that was not a great conversation, but anyways.
I wrote a letter to Mrs. Chaplin apologizing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah.
Which went down very well. It's good you did that. That went down very well.
Who knows where I would stand with her, you know, without that letter.
And so New Bedford was already up and running. And did you have the Greenpoint space yet, or did that come next?
Yes, I did.
Because you had a shop front, and that kind of dovetails into how Schumacher crossed your path. But
yeah. So the Greenpoint shop was not a profitable, really. It was like a fun project, and it sustained itself. It didn't make a lot of money, but what it did do is it brought really important people into my life and into the business. So Stephanie, who started working 3 days a week, is now a partner in the business. And Timur, who happened to walk across the shop on a Saturday,
the CEO of Schumacher. Yeah.
Schumacher. So, you know, you know, you never know where business is going to lead you. Like, I just wanted to do a storefront. It was something I was always interested in doing. And I'm glad I did it, not because it was profitable, but because it really did introduce me to some pretty crucial people in the business.
Mhm.
And so Timur, I think, yeah, Steph was working on a Saturday and Timur walked into the shop and Stephanie started the conversation, as she beautifully does. And we continued that conversation in a more, you know, real way with Dara. And then we started the collaboration. So, you know, it was a longer conversation than just that, but it did grow organically in that way where it felt sort of like meant to be.
Yeah. And so then what was it like for you guys? So, you know, Caroline, you kind of like organically launched this brand and one thing led to another, cross paths with Stephanie. Stephanie had like a really amazing skill set that could help take it to the next level. You've got this brand that you guys are really growing now and nurturing. And then you align with Schumacher and start working on a collection for Schumacher that really was something that you guys hadn't done before in terms of what you'd been doing with CZH. So what was that like for you guys to work with Schumacher and develop product with a partner and maybe using techniques that hadn't been part of the CZH vocabulary yet?
I mean, it was like the cool, excuse me, that first collaboration, and still today, it's the coolest collaboration I've ever heard of or been a part of, for sure. It's been, you know, at the time we were pretty exclusively just creating products, which would be napkins, pillows, blankets, throws, rugs, which are still very exciting. And I love to do that. But the Fabric by the Yard became possible and became like such a real thing because of Schumacher, and the way that we developed our first collaboration was so fun. I mean, I just got to do all of the fun parts of designing, and Schumacher really helped with all of the production. So what you see here is a sampling of the first collection. And, you know, there's wovens that I had never done before. There's embroidery. There's, you know, obviously digital and silkscreen prints, and all of that.
Shears, yeah.
And so all of that was like so exciting to me. And I think it really opened my eyes up to Fabric by the Yard in general, in a real way, you know, and because, you know, as you can probably tell from this conversation, we've never, you know, had investment for the business. You know, we've never really had a business plan to sort of say, okay, we're going to spend this amount of money to develop this amount of fabric. We really never thought about the business that way. And so Schumacher allowed us to create this breadth of work without very much investment on our part, other than our creative investment, which is just such a cool thing. And in terms of New Bedford, we were able to really design with Schumacher for some of those collaborated SKUs and understand like what do interior designers really look for when they're wanting, you know, a fabric. And that has also been vitally like just crucial for us as well, like how, you know, how to think about Fabric by the Yard in less of like, you know, a painterly way, which I think is cool, but also like what is usable? What do interior designers really tend towards, and what is you know,
because that's one thing that's so fascinating. It's always been so fascinating to me about interior design is that it's kind of where like the creativity and practicality like merge, you know, and like, how do you take this product that's beautiful and then actually apply it, actually use it? Yeah,
exactly. It's, you know, it is a different eye, I think, in terms of those two things, the design versus the interior design.
And I do think that I think I should say, like at the beginning, we were quite skeptical about working with Schumacher or any big brand, because we didn't have any experience of that. We didn't, you know, the block printing facility at New Bedford wasn't in a place where we could, you know, scale, we weren't in a place yet where we could scale and print. Now we're printing like 500 yards plus a month, but at that stage we weren't at that. But then in that stage there were still technical hitches and printing things, and we thought, oh, is this something we can do? But I think Schumacher's insistence and like persistence, and also just really investing in us and in the story, and really believing and wanting to support what we were doing, really won us over. So I think it was really seeing that you were genuinely interested in helping us develop as a business. And because first you said, okay, we'll sell 6 of your SKUs in our showrooms, let's see how that does, and if you feel good about that, then let's explore a collaboration. And so that felt also like a really great way to start. It was like you really made that it's safe for us to do that. And yeah, the process was so fun. I mean, coming into the Schumacher head office and sitting with Pam and the design team, and you running through all of the options and saying, we got all of these, now you have to pick 3. And we were like, wait, we want all of them. Wait, we can't choose,
I know, it's a good problem to have, but it's always the hardest part.
Yeah, but it was so fun to see that process develop, and to see wallpapers and things that we could only dream about doing kind of created. That was really cool.
Yeah, no, it was so amazing for our team as well. I know. And I mean, one of the things that I love about that first collection, and I will just say also that Schumacher has a second collection coming out with Caroline Z. Hurley that will launch this July, which is super beautiful. And it still very much feels like a Caroline Z. Hurley collection, but has a whole new range of patterns and colorways. So keep your eyes open for that. But one of the things that I love so much about the first collection also is, Caroline, you were talking a little bit earlier about how inspired by place you are. And I know that, every pattern in this first collection seems intimately tied to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
And I would love it if you could just tell us a bit about, the inspiration behind even a few of them, or kind of, how that happened.
Yeah. So as I said before, I'm really inspired by place. So oftentimes when I travel, I see things through a new lens, and I'm able to sort of, kind of like what we were saying before with this childlike vision. Everything is exciting and new, and travel really sparks that for me, as it does I would say everyone. But with Martha's Vineyard, it was sort of the birthplace of what I consider my sort of creative spark. So I went to Martha's Vineyard when I was at Rhode Island School of Design. I would go there because it was a ferry ride away, and I had friends that would go there often. And it started sort of to, create a connection to nature for me, which I hadn't had before. My friend had a house there that was in the middle of nowhere on this island, on Chappaquiddick, that has no power, has no running water. And, you really feel connected to nature there. And it was the first place that I went to that really rooted me in nature and made me feel creatively inspired by nature. And so I wanted this collection to be about that. So when I designed, I still was starting off with this sort of simple language like we talked about before, but I did sort of grow from there. I made designs based on sort of that feeling of rootedness and connectedness to nature. And then, the Menemsha print, which I'm not sure we have a slide of, but it is sort of this tiny little brush stroke that is reminiscent of ocean and water, and sort of the way that water ripples through, let's see if the Menemsha on the bottom right. And so location does seem to be a pretty integral source of inspiration for me, and even for my paintings too, although it changes often, but that does seem to be sort of a through line for me, is sort of going to a place, taking what you can gather from there, feeling its essence, and then coming back to the studio and working with that.
I love it. So cool. So I want to be mindful of just making sure I leave time for any questions, because I feel like I could talk to you guys forever and ever and ever, lose track of the time. But I did want to make sure that we touched on a couple of other things. Also, another one of the things that I love about CZH is that it's really a women-led company. And, you guys have just really been able to kind of, forge your own path. And I'd love to hear what that's been like to really be, now with Carolina. So there's a picture of Caroline and Stephanie, and in the center is Carolina, who Stephanie mentioned earlier, who is the CZH's creative director.
Production director.
Production director. Okay.
Yeah.
So I just would love to hear what that's been like as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool to think about our growth since Stephanie and Carolina joined. Like, as I said before, like I would say that my strength is creativity and my weakness is like basically everything else. So, I do feel like, in the beginning, Steph really created order and created systems that allowed us to grow. And Carolina has created the same, in which, like, I think Stephanie might have mentioned this, but like the spec sheets that I was creating were all drawn by hand with like paint chips. And like, I would just send that in USPS to New Bedford and they would replicate it. And Carolina has come in and sort of systemized everything. So we don't send anything in the mail. It's all over email, obviously, so there's been updates to the business that have come because Carolina and Steph have really grown the business. And also, this is, there's in New Bedford, it's mostly all women as well, which is super cool. And we also have another studio manager who wasn't pictured in this photo, who's also a female in Red Hook. So it does feel like really cool to be able to steer our own ship and to make our own big business decisions, and without any like strong male at the head. And it's really, I mean, I feel like we've come a long way just historically, and also just within our own business, forging ahead in a pretty like cool and, slow, sure and steady way with just us has been really exciting. I mean, Steph can probably talk more to that as well, but it's been cool.
Yeah, I think I don't think that was something that Caroline intended. I definitely think that before I started working for her, she probably would have said like, oh, I'm not really a feminist. I just like have feminist values. And I was like, oh, you're a feminist. We definitely, I mean, I think that, you're being very modest, Cara, but I think one of your amazing strengths is that you have this magnetism that draws people to you and to your business, that is so truthful and so honest and is exciting, and people want to be a part of that. And I think that it's not an accident that you found a collection of people that are invested in the business and want to be a part of that. And I think the fact that those all happen to be amazing women is just testament to how amazing women are, which we all already know. But I think the business just bears that out. So yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. But it takes a village. I feel like I still am shocked by what we can accomplish with just 4 people. I mean, and not everyone is full time. So it's pretty incredible.
So cool. I love it. Okay, so let's have folks put questions in the chat or the Q&A feature if anybody has questions. And while people are having a chance to do that, I would just love to hear what you guys have spent the past year doing. I feel like this past year has been really unexpected, and it's presented a lot of challenges for everyone in all kinds of ways. And it's also presented some opportunities that like never would have surfaced otherwise. So I just would love to hear how CZH has spent the past year.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest transformations have happened this year in the best way. Of course, it's been a terrifically hard year on so many levels. But what the pandemic has done for us is Well, I think it's made us realize how strong we are actually, even without being in studio together. We still have been able to plow ahead and create our business, and that's been pretty impressive and cool to know. And then in addition to that, because we've all been separate, I've had this incredible opportunity to work alone in studio and develop this painting practice that I have been talking about, which has been so integral to all of our growth. And without the pandemic, I'm not sure that I would have carved as much time for myself as I did. And it was a real gift for me. You know, I was going in every single day and really, really working on ideas that I had been wanting to flesh out. And it gave me a tremendous amount of creativity and time. And I was also pregnant at the time, so I could work as slowly as I needed to. And, you know, I feel like that was just such a gift. And then in terms of the business, you know, Steph was able to go back to the UK during that time and work remotely. And we sort of tested that out in a real way for several months. And we realized that that works. So, you know, Stephanie has now moved back to the UK and is still a part of the business and a very important part. And it's cool that that's what the pandemic has showed us, you know, and it's totally possible. I mean, yeah, the time differences are annoying and frustrating for Steph mostly, but I feel like you know, the pandemic has been a gift in a lot of ways. And, you know, I've lost family members to the pandemic, and I've experienced my own sort of postpartum issues, and it's been a very lonely time. But I think, you know, there's something about the spring, and the spring is now, and things becoming green is sort of like, you realize how much you've grown during this dark time. Like, even though everything has sort of been barren and bleak and white and lonely, you know, I've been sort of realizing like, oh, I did have a tremendous growth, and the business did sustain itself, and we got through it. And that has been really cool to realize. And I think that we're still in the middle of it, you know, we've just gotten used to it. But those are my thoughts about the past year. I mean, Steph, you might have other thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that has been, I mean, obviously everybody's been realizing the importance of home in a different way. And I think for us, it's made us even more focused on only creating what is necessary and meaningful, and stripping away a lot of the noise and just trying to go back to what is essential. And, you know, for us, that's, you know, fabrics by the yard, things that really make a difference to people's homes and make people feel really grounded in their homes. Our ethos is, you know, wanting to help people feel really grounded in their homes so they can go off and be adventurous in the world. And people haven't been able to be adventurous in the world for the last year. And so it's really forced us to dial back. I think also seeing Caroline's artwork practice develop in tandem with the design practice has been really interesting. So, you know, the past couple of years in Red Hook is the first time that Caroline's actually had her painting studio in the same place as where we all work and where we design. And so that's almost been, you know, before it sort of felt like an accident almost, that, you know, themes would come up in her paintings or colors would come up in her paintings and then they would show up months later in designs. And seeing them together creates a much more holistic sort of sense of the business. And it's almost like turning Caroline's mind inside out and being able to see everything that's in there, and being able to see those two together has been really cool. It gives us on both sides a better understanding of how they both work together. So that's been really cool.
Amazing. Okay, let's jump over here to the Q&A. So how, in terms of like starting your own business and actually like the kind of like the nuts and bolts side of it, like how long did it take before it really, that you felt it was kind of like a profitable business and you could like hire on, you know, folks to be part of the business? Like, what was that process like?
Well, as I said before, I've never really had a business plan, and I always sort of like threw myself into it, like throwing caution to the wind. And that strategy has worked for me. And I know that does not work for everyone, but like I hired Steph and offered her a salary, having no idea where that money was coming from. I don't have a secret bank account. That time there was no like money that I could draw from that was like a secret little, like there wasn't any of that. And even when I opened the storefront, I was like, well, I'll just be the store manager. I'll just do it all. I in terms of profitability, I didn't have a plan, and I didn't really think about, if I invest in this amount will be the return. That wasn't ever like a part of my thinking. Now I do think about that. And that is because of Steph, who is so good at data and so good at pulling reports and helping me to understand like, what creates profit. But I sort of learned as I went along, and everything I made from the business just went directly back into the business. And I could live off of like very little at the time. I was really lucky and was paying very little for rent. And like, I just made it work. And I, looking back, I actually really don't even know. It just like every month at the end of the month, I don't know how, but magically I was able to pay for everything. And that really, it was some kind of leap of faith. Like, I don't know how that happened, but it did. And that probably isn't a great answer to your question. And I probably wouldn't follow my own advice. But that's how I did it. It was the only thing I knew how to do, was to just like throw myself into it and hope for the best. And it did work.
I think it's also important to remember too, that there are a lot of different ways to do it. That there's not just one set way that it has to be done. But Stephanie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think the thing that you have, the thing that you have always said, Caro, is though, if I create things that are meaningful to me and that resonate with me, they will resonate with other people. So, and similarly with like investing in the business or whatever, you've always said, people are the most important thing in the business. So I'll find a way to pay the people that I need in the business, because without that, there is no business. So, we cut corners where, I think up until now, or up until quite recently, or until I came on, you were bootstrapping everything. You were doing everything yourself. You were finding ways to like, do everything yourself so that you weren't paying people. And at a certain point, it was kind of looking at the business and saying, okay, we need to invest a certain amount in order to get a bigger return. We need to like believe in the business enough to put money into it and to enable it to grow. So
that's accurate. I do think that like when like, if for me at least, if the more vulnerable and the more honest I am with the designs, and the more I do things that I actually just really want to do, the more profit it actually brings in. So that's also given me a sense of freedom, especially having Steph and Carolina around to really just like go hard into that and trust that will be profitable. But I also like tried to take a business class actually during the pandemic, and I had to stop. I like got so overwhelmed. Like I was like, I just have to trust myself. Like, I don't know how to make these spreadsheets. Like, so, to each his own.
Absolutely. Okay, we have another question. How did Schumacher discover CZH? And so that we talked about a little bit earlier in the webinar. Our CEO, who lived in Greenpoint at the time, happened to wander into the storefront that Caroline had, and it kind of like sparked this incredible relationship that Schumacher now has with CZH, but is also, that question is an opportunity for me to just tell everybody that we'll send out the link to the webinar. So if you weren't able to join the whole thing, or want to, kind of like re-listen to certain parts of it, you'll be able to do that. So you will be getting the link to the webinar from Schumacher. Another question gives me another opportunity to say an adjacent thing. Was someone's wondering if you license your art or your work with other fabric or home furnishings houses. And I don't think you guys are. Schumacher and CZH are in partnership for the running yardage and the wallpapers and the trims. But CZH also does make its own product line. of incredible pillows and throws and, just different sort of capsule collections of various product categories. So just, follow CZH on Instagram. You guys still have a newsletter, right?
Yeah.
Sign up for the newsletter to just stay aware of the latest and greatest that they're doing. And then we'll just round it out with this question. Someone would love to know what your relationships have been like over the past year with the amazing artisans who you partner with in, wherever that is, in New Bedford. Are you still making things with folks in Mexico? I know you were at some point. How
No,
that sort of
our
supply chain thing is.
Yeah, our relationship with artisans has like sort of narrowed down specifically to New Bedford. We were making things in Mexico and Guatemala, but as we sort of focus more in on Fabric by the Yard, we don't do that as much. I mean, we actually still do make rugs in Guatemala, and that is a part of our sort of like classic collection of things, but nothing sort of new. It's the same style rug that we're reproducing. But in terms of development, it's really, we're putting all of our efforts into New Bedford.
And those guys were able to stay safe this year, and you were able to keep production rolling there, which was incredible because there was, everybody experienced it, but there was a moment where it was like, what is a supply chain now? Like, what is that? And
Right.
To be able to keep that going, and keep people in jobs and being able to keep paying them and keep that rolling was amazing, which is great.
Totally.
Yeah, that's part of, that's the flip side of owning your own factory, really, is being able to also, decide, and everything is like in partnership with them. So kind of being able to have that conversation where nobody's telling you what you can and can't do, but just saying like, what feels comfortable to you, what feels good, like how can we help with this? And that has been really valuable. I think it's also, in terms of winnowing down and thinking about what's essential and what's most important to us, relationships with artisans are really amazing, and they're very complex, and it's a conversation, and there's also really long lead times to be aware of, like lots of potential for things to go wrong, or quality control, various other things. And I think we just thought, okay, if we have to just focus on one area, we still, as Caroline said, we still produce in Guatemala, and produce that those rugs are made by one man who sits and makes them all in his home. So we still do want to support him and are invested in him, but everything else we kind of thought, let's focus on our own like homegrown artisans here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we're 2 minutes shy of an hour, so I think we'll just wrap it up there, but thank you so much to both of you. We love having CZH as a partner, and not only developing beautiful Schumacher goods with you guys, but also seeing what you're doing with the CZH brand is really wonderful. And we're huge cheerleaders and look forward to lots more good stuff between the two companies to come. And for anybody watching, you can go to Schumacher's website, fschumacher.com, to look at the Caroline Z. Hurley goods that we have there. And if you're not in the trade, you can also go to Caroline Z. Hurley's site to possibly buy things retail, all kinds of options to get the things and have them in your home. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Yeah,
great talking with you.
Thank you, Annie, for coordinating, and to Megan, and thank you for our relationship means a lot to us and to our business, and your investment in us means a lot. So thank you so much for
likewise
that,
and
for the
look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Megan.
Take
Bye
care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.